In this unit, we examine an ordinary old paperback, the kind found on any second-hand shelf. And we examine the quiet, unsettling name that librarians have given to what is happening inside it. They call it the slow fire. Pick the book up and you can almost see why. The pages have gone the colour of weak tea, the margins are brittle, and when you turn a corner, it does not fold. It snaps off clean like a corner of a cracker. We tend to blame the usual suspects: damp, age, 100 careless hands. Reasonable guesses, everyone, and every one of them is missing the real culprit, which was placed inside the paper, deliberately, at the mill, long before the book was ever read. Today we learn how a book can be built to destroy itself. Part 1. The page that shatters. Here we are fortunate to have a specimen, a mass-market paperback, printed sometime in the last century. Nothing rare, nothing precious, and that is exactly the point. Because this is not the fate of one unlucky book, it is the fate of a great many of them, made across more than 100 years between roughly 1850 and 1980. Open one, and the damage has a pattern. The browning is worst at the edges and creeps inward. The page darkens evenly all the way through, not in stains but in a single uniform tea-coloured tone. And the brittleness arrives on a schedule. A book fine at 30 years, fragile at 60, and shattering at 90. That regularity is the clue. Damp is patchy, careless hands are random. But this is uniform and it is punctual. Something is happening to the paper itself from the inside at a steady chemical pace. To find it, we must go back to the mill. Part 2, from rag to wood pulp. For most of the history of paper, the recipe was wonderful. Paper was made from rag, worn-out cotton and linen cloth, pulped and pressed into sheets. Rag paper is almost pure cellulose, clean and stable, and it lasts. There are letters on rag paper 500 years old, still supple, still white at the core. Then, in the 1800s, the world began to read. Newspapers, novels, catalogues, schoolbooks. The demand for paper exploded, and there was nowhere near enough old cloth to feed it. So the mills turned to the one raw material there was no shortage of: wood. Wood pulp was cheap, and it was endless, and it made the modern book possible. But wood pulp paper is thirsty. Left alone, it drinks up ink and lets every line feather into a blur. So, to seal the surface and keep the printing crisp, the papermakers added a sizing. The common recipe of the age paired two ingredients: a tree resin called rosin, set with a compound called alum. And that pairing, alum and rosin, in the presence of a little moisture, quietly produces an acid. Sulfuric acid, not a splash of it, not a spill, a trace, distributed with great evenness throughout the sheet. The mills, in their thoroughness, had seasoned every page with the seed of its own undoing. Part 3. The slow fire. Now we come to the heart of the unit, and it is worth holding still for. A sheet of paper is not a solid. It is a felt of fibres, and each fibre is built from cellulose. Long, strong molecules, thousands of sugar rings linked end to end into chains. It is the sheer length of those chains that makes paper flexible and tough. A page folds and does not break because those long fibres bend and hold. Acid does one specific thing to a chain like that. It catalyzes its hydrolysis. It acts as a tireless little pair of scissors, snipping the long chains at random into shorter and shorter pieces. And here is the reveal. The acid is not used up when it cuts. It is a catalyst. It does the deed and walks on, free to cut again and again for decades. Warmth speeds the scissors, humidity speeds the scissors, and year by quiet year the long fibres are cut into stubble. Watch what that does to the page. As the chains shorten, the paper loses its flexibility first. It stiffens. Then it loses its strength. It yellows and browns as the broken cellulose changes colour, and at last the fibres are too short to hold together at all, and the page, at the lightest touch, gives way to powder. This is the slow fire. Not a blaze, not smoke, a burning without heat, a combustion measured in decades, feeding on paper from the inside. The book was not attacked. The book was consuming itself exactly as built. Part 4. Why whole libraries, all at once? And here the trouble widens, because this was never one book's problem. Every mill of the industrial age used the same cheap acidic recipe, which means a whole century of printed matter was manufactured, in effect, with the same lit fuse. And the fuses were lit at roughly the same time. So the world's great collections did not age gracefully, book by book. They began to fail together, by the shelf, by the wing. When conservators finally did the sums, the numbers were grave. In many major libraries, a large share of the books were already too brittle to open safely. An entire era of what humankind had written down, a century of newspapers, science, and story, was quietly turning to dust on the shelf, all on the same schedule. A civilization was, without noticing, forgetting itself. Part 5. Building paper that lasts. Now here the unit turns hopeful, because once the culprit had a name, the cure was a matter of chemistry. And chemistry is a thing we are rather good at. The insight was simple and elegant. If the enemy is an acid, give the paper a defender, a base held in reserve inside the sheet. So papermakers began adding a fine alkaline filler, most often calcium carbonate. The mild stuff of chalk and limestone worked right into the pulp. It does two jobs at once. It neutralizes the acid already present, and it stands guard, a buffer waiting to swallow any new acid the years might bring. Then they wrote it down, so it could never be lost. The recipe for paper built to last became an international standard, catalogued with perfect solemnity as ISO 9706. Permanent paper that carries that mark is made acid-free, with its alkaline reserve built in, and is designed to survive not decades but many centuries. And for the millions of books already burning, there is a rescue. Whole libraries now send their brittle volumes through mass deacidification, a treatment that carries an alkaline agent deep into each page and quenches the acid where it sits, halting the fire mid-burn and buying the book generations it would never have seen. The review card, and so we have learned that an old book can carry its own ending, a trace of acid folded into the paper at the mill, patiently cutting the long threads that hold a page together until the page gives way to dust. We learned that a cheap recipe set a whole century of print alight at once, in a slow fire without a flame. And we learned that a civilization, catching its own memory in the act of dissolving, named the exact molecule to blame and answered it with a pinch of chalk and a written rule, so that the next 1,000 years might still be legible. Class dismissed, and if a hidden order quietly written into an ordinary thing is the kind of secret you enjoy, go and read the unit on the barcode hidden in tree rings.